Hello, love. It's me, Alexandra. Why the fuck is that making me cry? Hello, hazelnuts, and welcome back to the show. Today we're doing something a little bit different. I'm introducing a new format with the working title, Hayes Says Hello to Herself. And I'm going to be giving myself some advice today. And this idea, I've been thinking about, I had that name, Hayes Says Hello to Herself, in my brain for a while, and it's something I've been kind of noodling on, but the impetus to do this today came to me last night, and maybe if I'm honest, starting on like Monday. When last night I realized that I would not be able to do an advice column today. The episode that I had planned is about flaky friends, and I am really excited to do that. But laying here crying, I cried myself to sleep last night. I've cried myself to sleep the last couple of nights, which I'll get to in a minute. But I just was like, there's no way that I'm going to be able to do my advice thing for others tomorrow. But what does that mean? Because I have a show to put on, right? I have work to do, I have responsibilities. And laying there, I started to think about what my possible solutions could be. So I don't want to get too ahead of myself because I actually I wrote a Hello Hayes letter that has all these questions that I want to talk about today. And, the episode's going to be different. It's different in format because you're hearing from me. But it's also like, I'm doing this because I need some advice. Like, I need some guidance. And I had lunch with a friend yesterday, my friend Cleo, and we were just talking about how hard it is to extend the generosity that we show others to ourselves. And it's hard for me to do that. And I really want to. I want to be able to be as generous to myself as I am to others. And I might cry through this episode. I might cry, and crying doesn't need an explanation, but like sometimes I worry that if I cry, when I cry, people might misinterpret it as like crying as a sign of falling apart, or maybe I just want myself to know that. Maybe I want myself to know that crying doesn't mean that I've reached the point of no return. It's an expression of the moment I'm in right now. But I might cry because I had something of like a grief explosion this week. The thing about grief I have found for me is that sometimes I'm able to like push it to the side. Like sometimes I'll have a moment and I'm like, I actually can't really deal with that today. I have a really busy day. I'm going to push that. Like I just can't address this now. I'm going to shelve it and I'll come back to it later. And then other times it just like explodes in these like little tiny fireworks. Like it happens, you see it happening, and then you hear the full weight of the explosion later, and it just like one after the next after the next. I haven't quite nailed this metaphor yet, but Monsters Inc., that big room where the monsters go into and there's all the doors to the different bedrooms. I've sort of been thinking about grief as like there's something about grief that reminds me of that room, and there's like all these doors, and you don't necessarily know what the door will be. Sometimes a grief explosion is triggered by something like something obvious, like a birthday, a person's birthday, or like the date of something happening. But it could also be triggered by like a piece of kale. Like for me, my grandma used to when I lived in New York City, and she was in Jersey for many years. On Sundays, she'd come in and we'd spend the day together. And while I was teaching, she would meal prep for me because she was meal prepping for herself as a hairdresser. And one of the dishes that she always made was brown rice, sauteed chicken, kale, and hot peppers. And the kale was always destemmed. You know how like the thick parts of the kale? I don't know if this is actually true, but they're hard to digest. And she always destemmed it for me. There's kale in the fridge, and sometimes it'll be kale that'll spark the explosion. And I didn't feel that I had it in me to give advice today in the advice podcast. I have it in me to give advice because giving advice for me is something that is very intrinsic and it's very natural and intuitive, and there's a greater responsibility when I'm giving advice to someone else, I take that more seriously than I do the way I talk to myself. And maybe I need to do some rebalancing there. Like maybe I need to treat myself. I need to take the advice I give to myself as seriously as I do, hazelnuts on the internet. But I just didn't feel that I could bring my best self to advice giving to others, but I want to bring my best self to me. So to structure this conversation, I did write myself a little Hello Haze letter that I want to talk about with you guys. And I'm not nervous. I'm actually excited. I just hope that it works. There's something scary about what's the word? Like, you know what? I'm going to save it. I'm going to save it for my answer, because something I fear is like wandering from the format that works, like could be a bad thing for business. So I have a little bit of nerves about like doing that. So I guess we'll see. Anyway, Hayes says hello to herself. Here's our letter. Hello, love. It's me, Alexandra. Why the fuck is that making me cry? Hello, love. It's me, Alexandra. I'm writing to you because I have an advice podcast to film, but I really don't feel like I can give advice today. This happens every now and then. Sometimes I don't feel like it just because I don't feel like it, like when you don't feel like going to work. And on those days, I do it anyway, right? I have responsibilities. However, other times it feels like I can't give advice because the emotional well that I draw from is dry. What do I do in those moments? The answer is not as simple as just take a break, because my advice columning is not a hobby, it's a career. If I want to be the advice columnist for the internet generation that I say that I am, I have to actually show up and give advice on the internet in the same way that other people show up to fulfill their responsibilities at work. Like, I don't see John Oliver just like not showing up to his show because he was having a bad day. At the same time, I know that I have to protect the thing that makes me a compelling advice columnist and storyteller, and that's that emotional well that I was talking about. I feel things really, really big, and I draw on that ability to feel things in my work. But it also means that when I'm having like a grief explosion, that it can take me out for a few days. And I don't think forcing myself to give others advice when I need to focus my energy on myself is the right move either. Am I making any sense? I guess my question is, what do I do when the show must go on, but I feel empty? How can I protect myself while also building the biggest advice show in the world? What's the balance between pursuing my ambition and my self-preservation? What does it mean to be an advice columnist when I also need my advice? Yours, me. Okay, so which part of this do I want to talk about first? I think I first want to tell you that I want to tell you how proud I am of you, that for all of the times, I want to tell you how proud I am of you for the way that you show up, because you do. And I know that I can be really hard on myself. Like sometimes I trick myself into thinking that I'm like weak, and I'm actually fucking not. I'm really not. I'm extremely strong. And I want to like applaud myself and applaud this version of me who wrote this letter, that like you do show up. You show up all the time, and you work really, really hard, and you do a better job than you're realizing in this letter of like balancing your ambition and your self-preservation, as you referenced. Like I remember back when I started the podcast, maybe it was a few episodes in before I took my big break. I was really starting to unravel then. And there was one episode that I made. I don't remember what the episode was, but I remember I was wearing, if you want to go back and look in the archive, I was wearing a collared navy and cream shirt, and my hair was straight in the episode. It might have been reacting to friendship breakups. I'll have to go and fact check that. And I remember I really, really was feeling quite depressed that day. And it was in the beginning. And I remember I still got up and I made the episode because I felt I could. And I was talking with my friend Stephanie after, and she said to me, you know what that tells me is that you're a professional. You're a professional. And it doesn't mean then that when I didn't show up and stopped making it that I wasn't professional. But I bring that up because like you have shown up before, and you do show up, and I'm proud of you. I think the question of what do you do when your well is dry is really, really important to be thinking about as I continue on. So the emotional well that I'm referring to, like in the advice I give, this is a little processy, but like I have a lived experience, as we all have lived experiences. And some of our I do share some lived experience with the people who write letters to me. But mostly what I'm pulling from are the feelings associated with lived experiences. So the dread that I may have felt in one specific situation in my life, even though the person writing to me about dread is a completely different situation, I can draw on the feeling of dread. And as I referenced, like I feel things really, really big, which is a talent of mine, I think, is it a talent? I think I've made it into a talent, right? I've like taken just something that is kind of a true and a fact, and I have made it into a talent. It is a part of my talent. I would not be the writer or advice columnist that I am without my ability to feel those things. And starting Hello Hayes and making the advice column was, in a way, even if I didn't realize it, a tool for me to kind of channel all of those big feelings. But I'm drawing from this well where I store all these feelings. Now, I draw on the well when I'm giving advice to others, but I also draw on the well for myself. And I do that without words, right? I draw on the well for myself, not in advice column form. I do it simply like when I was kind of very depressed this winter and was really struggling, and there were days where I couldn't really imagine it would get better. I was drawing from that well and drawing hope and courage from that well. It's sort of like I was thinking, actually, someone was asked, like, what advice would I give to someone who's like really stuck in that darkness and doesn't see their way out? And it kind of reminds me of, when you're driving in your neighborhood and you know your neighborhood so well that at a certain point your brain sort of shuts off and you're just driving home safely. But there comes to a minute when you're like slowing at a stop sign and you're like, holy shit, like I wasn't really paying attention. Like I was paying attention because I stopped, but like I was really kind of moving on autopilot a little bit. I think that having an emotional well to draw from that gives you courage, it's kind of like this like deep knowing that things are going to be okay because you've done it before. I know that I know how to get myself home, even when I'm not super focused in on it. I trust that there's something within me that'll get me to my destination. I feel like I've already, so far, we're like 20 minutes in and I've thrown out 2 uncooked metaphors. So who knows if those make any fucking sense. But I have to make sure that that emotional well that I use for my work and my life is watered. It doesn't need to be full all the time, but when it's dry, that's a fucking problem. And it's a really, I think this question of like, what do I do when my work is to give advice, but my well is dry? What do I do is like maybe the most important question. And it's not just an important question for my mental health. It's an important question for my business. And I think I appreciate that I acknowledged it. I appreciate that you acknowledged this, letter writer. I'm curious about. I am referencing, because if somebody came to me and said, I write an advice column as a hobby, but sometimes it's like hard for me, I would tell them to take a fucking break. But the reality is that if you have a job and if you have a dream and an ambition, like sometimes you can't take breaks. Sometimes taking a break is not actually the best solution. And for me, like, you guys, I want to make the biggest advice show in the world. Like, I think I am an advice columnist for the internet generation. I've been working a little bit on my branding. I kind of avoided the topic of branding for a while because it's hard for me, but I have since, I have a couple of really great friends who are very just like smart and creative people, and they've helped encourage me to do those branding exercises and to do them with me because they're helpful. They're helpful for me in so many ways, not to mention like the external perception of my brand. But, I'm an advice columnist for the internet generation. And I think that my advice meets people at the intersection of affirmation and accountability. I believe that I can make the biggest advice show in the world. I want to reach as many people as possible because I feel like I'm filling a gap, and I think that people are lonelier than ever. And I I I, I feel this like immense, intense belief in what Hello Haze can do in the world. And other times I feel like I'm just a girl who sometimes cries herself to bed at night. Like I feel both. And I think the fact that I feel both is a good thing, but solutions that involve me only catering to one side of myself don't work for me. Like I remember I was talking to someone once about like feeling ready to make content again. And like feeling, I think I said I'm feeling like my ambitious self. And someone said to me, and so it's okay if you don't want to be ambitious. And that might be fine for you. It might be fine for you to not be ambitious, but for me that isn't fine. Me without my ambition, me not feeling inspired to work and make things is not me being myself. Something's wrong. So where I've really struggled in the making of Hello Haze and in the like unraveling and then raveling back up over the last year is like, how am I protecting both pieces of myself? And I think that yes, taking a break, skipping a week when I need to is okay. Like I do need to be flexible when that comes up, but it's not a good long-term solution, especially for someone who does feel big things and does have some raw grief. And it's not sustainable for me, both because it's not a good business strategy. Like it's not good to just take breaks from your work whenever, but also because I feel a lot of shame around when I need those breaks. And yes, that's something for me to work on. I could work on reducing, like not feeling so ashamed when things happen. But better yet, how can I better plan for this reality? Reality being that there are some weeks that I need to reserve my emotional well for myself. I think I would recommend to someone else that they actually create a content strategy or like create a business strategy that incorporates who they really are. If the business that you're trying to build does center you, right? Like it's a little bit I'm allowed to be, oh my God, I feel myself being like, that's not very relatable. Like you're talking about yourself right now. You're talking about yourself right now, and that's not very relatable. But my fucking God, this is literally an advice column to myself. I have to stop doing that. It's okay to help. It's okay to help yourself. It's okay to help yourself. And that's the whole purpose of this episode. So I am going to talk about myself. I'm in a unique position where my business centers around me, right? Like Hello Haze is an advice column. It's so much more than that. It's a feeling. It's that like affirmation and accountability thing. But it does center around me, right? I'm the connective tissue of it all. So I should be building a business around like what's going to work for me. And I wonder if this type of format, like Hayes says hello to herself, could be something interesting that I incorporate more frequently, because this doesn't feel draining for me. Like, it doesn't feel draining for me. Being on camera doesn't feel draining. Sometimes it does, actually, but I'm not concerned about being on camera doesn't feel draining. What feels draining when I'm having a tough time is giving advice to others. Sometimes I'm able to do it, but it's right. I can have a bad day or be in a bad mood and still give great advice, great by my standards. But other times, I don't have the strength to give it to come to it with like the earnestness and kindness, and like my brain is just like my brain simply isn't functioning at its best. There are things that I might not see. And I'd rather in those moments talk to myself. But I guess I fear that isn't interesting, or that it's too self-indulgent. And maybe it will be. I guess we're going to experiment and see. Though I have noticed that when I've made videos in the past that are similar to this, where I'm talking through my fears and how I'm dealing with them, people have said that it means something to them. And it's particularly interesting and helpful to see somebody who gives advice to others apply that same generosity to themselves. And I think I would be interested in that. Like Ask Polly is one of my favorite advice columns. She's on Substack. She used to write for New York Mag for a long time. I love the Ask Polly column, but I really love when Heather's her name, writes about her essays. Like I love those. And I love getting to see like her interior life. It gives the advice columns new meaning for me. So if I like that in other people's work, I should assume that some people might like that in mine too. So the questions I ask, I guess I also want to tell you about your grief explosions. I want to tell me that my grief explosions are normal. And that it's okay that they take time to recover from sometimes. And that you are pretty good. Sometimes you like have control over them, but the fact that you also let yourself feel your grief and your feelings so intensely where they just kind of wipe you out for a period of time, you have to do that if you're also going to control it sometimes. Like we'd have a problem if every time you felt grief or some uncomfortable feeling, you were like, don't have time for you right now. I'm gonna shelf that for now. We'd have a problem if that's how I responded to my feelings every time they came up. So I actually have pretty good balance. So you go, girl. Crushing it. So what do I do when the show must go on, but I feel empty? I think that like I said, I think that we keep making some new formats that are still in the Hello Haze ethos, but that I can and I shouldn't only use them in an emergency situation, right? Today wasn't an emergency. It's not that I don't need to be so fucking dramatic, but this was a last minute decision. I could start incorporating more episodes like this where I'm giving advice to myself or I'm navigating some questions that have been coming up recently. I could plan for those so that they feel more normal. So then when I do need it, when I need to draw on it, it feels like I have more options. I'm choosing another normal format rather than having to create something out of thin air that works. I think that could really help with my shame, right? Planning really works. And I think that creating more processes, like creating more formats, since the work I do is so emotional, of course, Hayes, literally, of course, every week you wouldn't be able to show up and give really heartfelt advice in podcast format. Like that, I think I've actually felt suffocated and scared by that reality. That as it is, there are no breaks in sight except for emergencies. And I love what I do, but I fear the day that I don't. And those days always come because even the things we love, there are days we hate. And I think I need to have a little bit, I think I need to mix things up a little bit to protect myself from that dread and that burnout. What does it mean to be an advice columnist when I also need my advice? Babe, I think that that's what makes you special. I am not the person on the internet that acts like she knows, or I don't want to be that person that acts like she knows that she has all of the fucking answers. That's boring. I'd be so bored by that. I'm just a person trying to figure it out loud, in public. And what makes you good at giving advice is the fact that you are flawed and confused and complicated yourself. That's what makes it interesting. And I think that's what makes people trust you. I think they trust you too because of the way that the way that you see them. But I can see them because of how I can see myself, because of how I allowed myself to see myself in all of the complicated things that I've felt in my life and have acted. Is there anything else I want to say to myself? I'm really proud of you, Alexandra, for asking this question. How do you protect yourself while also making the biggest advice show in the world? How do you pursue your ambition and your self-preservation? These are the really important questions that no one can answer but you. But you have to answer them. You have to. there's no future where you make the biggest advice column in the world and, you reach millions of people with your words and you help people feel less alone and you make people feel seen. There's no world where that happens if I'm not taking care of myself. Like, I, I am the asset. My heart, that emotional well, that is the diamond in the box in the museum, right? I have to protect that. I cannot abuse that. I really can't. I like take that really fucking seriously as like a business rule. And I know I keep saying that, but for me it's really important and helpful for me to think about this objective, not just as a happiness objective, but also as like a career objective. Because I'm passionate about my work. Like I'm a person who loves my work and who wants to see myself reach my potential, my creative potential. And that future doesn't exist unless I protect what's in there. So I think a good place to start is experimenting with some other formats so that you just have more flexibility where you're not always drawing on the well for others. And we'll see how this episode goes. We'll see if people like it. I enjoyed making it. This didn't feel draining for me. This actually feels energizing. I feel like I have some energy back. And I really want to be clear that I don't feel drained by making my advice show. Please don't think that. Please don't think that I feel drained by your letters. I don't. I feel energized by them. However, there are days where I need to reserve the energy for myself, even if even if I want to, I have to be more protective of my energy sometimes. But please, please, please do not misinterpret this to think that I don't want to get your questions or that I don't like making this show. I love it. That's why I'm taking this so seriously, because I love it so much and I want to protect the things that I love. And I love me too. I love myself too. I love myself too. I love myself too. So I'm going to take care of her. Thank you guys for listening. And if anything resonated with you in the comments, please let me know. If you have any advice, I'd be happy to hear it. You see me, if you're watching, or maybe you could even hear it in my voice. I felt a little hesitant about that because I'm curious if I continue to do these episodes, do I want advice? Maybe I'll say it. People are going to do whatever they want, I know, but maybe it's a case-by-case basis. There are some things that I might share that I don't want advice on. But if you have any encouraging words, I'm open to hearing them. Thank you for sharing your reactions to this with me and for being down for the experimentation. And I love you guys. And I'm really excited to make the Flaky Friends episode next week. It's going to be a good one. And because I did this, I know I'll be able to, give it my all. So with that, I love you. I hope you're having a good Tuesday. If you're listening to this the day it comes out, morning, night, wherever you are. I love you guys. Okay. I'll talk to you soon. Bye.